So my name is Marlène. I am the director of the HIV Programs and Advocacy Department here at IAS, and I'm also the executive editor of the Journal of International AIDS Society. And today I will be joined by Dr. Alberto Rossi, who is the JIAS managing editor. Alberto, do you want to say a few welcome words?
Thank you, Marlène, and welcome everyone to this workshop.
Thank you, Alberto. So I suggest we start because we have quite a packed agenda, and there will be time at the end of the workshop to ask any question you may have. You will see that in the chat there are some guidance and good sort of practice for this webinar, so don't hesitate to look at those. And let's start. But before we start, I would like, sorry, I'm just struggling. Okay. So this is the agenda of today's session. So there are two parts. The first part will be going through the manuscript structure, how to write each manuscript section. And the second part will really focus more on how to choose a journal and submit a manuscript, how editorial decisions are being made and what are the most common reasons for rejection, how to review a response to the reviewers, to revise your manuscript, and we'll discuss a little bit publication ethics. So the objectives today are twofold. By the end of this hour we're going to spend together today, we would like you to have a better idea on how to write and structure your manuscript and to write your manuscript in a way that will be representative of your study. And we would also like you to understand the editorial process of an article publication. So what's happening behind the scene, behind the curtains when you submit your paper. So, not sure, okay. Sorry, I'm struggling a little bit with moving my slides, but that should be fine. So few housekeeping rules before I start. Please type the question you have in the Q&A section and not in the chat. We are recording this session and the recording will be made available after the webinar. And if you have any question about this JIAS workshop, you can write to workshops@jiassociety.org. So the Journal of International AIDS Society is a journal that is multidisciplinary, and it's a journal that really aims to provide a platform for the dissemination of HIV research. We strongly encourage submission from low and middle income countries, and we also provide some capacity building opportunities for less experienced authors, as we do today. And if you will be joining us for IAS 2023 in Brisbane, we will also do an in-person workshop on how to write a scientific manuscript. The journal is peer-reviewed, obviously, open access, so everybody can read our content. And the impact factor that just actually came yesterday is 6. So, next slide. Okay, so you could ask me first, why is it so important to publish? And from a scientific point of view, it is critical to publish to advance the scientist, but also the science. And something to keep in mind is that results that are not published mean the research did not take place. So you may have the most interesting results. You may have lesson learned that you would like to share with the field that could be super useful to others. If you do not publish, no one will know. So that's always a difficult exercise, or sometimes, maybe not always, sometimes a difficult exercise, but that is a much needed exercise. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, I just can't seem to be able to control the presentation. Thanks. So the first question, before we start digging into the different part of the manuscript, that I would like you to ask, so to make you work a little bit. What do you think makes a good manuscript? And you're going to have a poll that is just going to show just right now. And I would like you to tell me if you think that a good manuscript is good because there is an interesting topic, or there's a very large sample size, so you have very valid data, or you ask a very good research scientific question, or you had a very interesting setting where your study took place? Or is it actually all of the above? What are you thinking? So we're going to let you a few seconds to vote. Don't be shy. We would like this session to be as interactive as it can be, considering we are all behind or in front of our screens. But let us know what you think. Is it A, B, C, D, or E? Just going to give 10 more seconds. And we are going to end the poll and show the results. So 61% thought it was all of the above. We had then 33% thinking that it was mainly because the scientific question was good, 4% because it was an interesting topic, and a person each for a large sample size and a setting of interest. To be fair, there's no right or wrong, but it is, to our opinion, more all of the above. Next slide, please. Next slide. So it needs to be all of that. A good question, an interesting setting, an unknown, a new question actually that you're trying to answer, a sample that is big enough so you can actually draw some conclusion based on that and answer your research question. Before you write your manuscript, there are things that we would like to encourage you to do. The first thing is really thinking about why you want to publish your work and whether it is publishable, in the sense that we all want to publish and to publish as many papers as we would like, but ask yourself whether you have sufficient data and if your data is solid enough to be published now, or if you need to continue a little bit more your research before you start writing your paper. Then the second point that you need to think of before writing your manuscript is deciding on what type of manuscript you write. I'm sure you've been scrolling through several journals and you have seen that there are many different types of manuscript. It could be, for example, if I take the example of a journal or International Aid Society, it can be short reports or research manuscript or debate or commentaries or systematic reviews and so on. So decide before you start to write any manuscript. Decide on the type of manuscript you would like to write, and decide as well on the target journal that you would like to submit to. Pay attention to the journal requirements that can be found in the guidelines for authors. Pay attention to the structure of a paper. So look at maybe published paper already from this journal and understand publication ethics to avoid violations. Next slide, please. Then, if you're convinced you have in mind your target journals, you know, the kind of paper you want to publish, the next phase is really taking, I would recommend, maybe you would do differently, but what I recommend is take a piece of paper and try to order your thoughts. And you can do that by answering to the questions that are on the screen. So ask yourself, very honestly, have you done something new and interesting? What research gaps did your study address? How did your study address these? What are your key findings? How can you make this work replicable? Are you confident in your work? Are your conclusions justified and not overstated? And what are the implications for research, practice, and policy? And do that before even you start writing. The chances are that if you are not, previous slides, please, a bit too fast. The chances are that if you're not able to answer those questions and you're not clear, you won't be clear in your manuscript either. Next slide, please. When it comes to the manuscript structure, and this will depend a little bit on the target journal you want to submit to, but it's globally very similar, at least for research manuscripts. In a manuscript, you're going to have your abstract, you're going to have an introduction, and methods and materials, a result section with table and figures, a discussion, and usually a conclusion that is not here, and other part like references, acknowledgement, author's contribution, and so on. So we're going to look at all those different parts in turns in the rest of this hour we're spending together. Next slide, please. When it comes to deciding on the order of which part you're going to start working on first, what we recommend, or what I would do, is always starting with figures and the table, because this is what is going to guide your paper. You need to think about the figures you need. So take a piece of paper and start drawing them, with your hand. Just make sure you select only the results and only the figures that are actually useful to answer to your research question. So sometimes it can be very tempting to put everything we have. Don't do that. Just be selective of what you need to answer a specific research question. Then usually the easiest part, when you have a structure and you know exactly what you've done your figures, you've done your table, you know what you want to tell, the easiest part to write is the methods. Have you done your research? Have you conducted it? So it should be quite easy to write. Then go with the results. So the results being the narrative that will go around your figures and your table. Make sure you do not duplicate those, but we will again come back to that later. Then usually people write the introduction, the discussion, which might be maybe the most difficult part to write, because there are no real guidance on how to write your discussion. It's less codified than the rest of the structure of a paper. And then the abstract. Some people prefer doing the abstract towards the end of their writing process. Some like to start with. And as I was mentioning, there are other sections in the paper, the acknowledgement, the references, and so on, that usually people work on at the very end. Next slide. Of course, while you're going to do that, we really recommend that you engage with your colleagues, the one who are maybe a bit more experienced, who have been publishing more, or people just to discuss and see whether it makes sense, whether they can understand. The good thing is always try with someone who knows nothing about your research, a scientist who knows nothing about your particular research. And if they can understand the purpose and how you did it and your results, means you're pretty much on good tracks. And if you have the opportunity to present your results at meetings or at conferences, do it. You will also get some feedback and questions that may challenge a little bit your results, but also make it stronger. Next slide, please. Okay, another poll question, making you work a little bit here. Why is the title of a paper so important? Is it because it's the part which is most often read? It is often the only part read. Is it because it discloses basic information and helps readers decide if they want to read more? Is it a mini advertisement of your paper, or a little bit as we were asking before, do you think that it is all of the above? So we will launch a poll now, and please don't be shy, answer this question. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're going to show the results now. So 60% of you thought that it was actually all of the above. And let's look at those various statements together. It is actually all of the above. You have to think that, next slide, please. The title is the part which is most often read. Previous slide. It's a little bit of a game. We're too fast or too slow today. And often it is the only part which is read. I think that we're all super busy. We have a ton of things to do, to read, and so on. So if in the title, just right away, you don't have all the information you need, unlikely, unless you're really willing to, that you're going to start digging into the abstract and digging into the paper. So your title needs to be short, specific, representative of your research, informative. And ideally, if you could put those 4 what, where, who, and how information in the title. This is tremendously helpful for the reader to decide on whether they're going to read the full abstract, because it's spot on and it's something that interests their research or their general interests or not. So think of your title really as a mini advertisement of the content of your paper. So be careful with, catchy statements. It is not, and maybe I'm going to have some backfire here, but this is not sort of journalism or blogs, it's research manuscripts. So you need to be accurate and you need to be informative, a bit less about, the declarative title or catchy titles. You're taking a little bit of a risk that people will actually not read the abstract and the paper. So you should make sure you are disclosing basic information. And again, as I was repeating, this is what is going to help the reader decide whether they want to read more or not. Next slide. So we have a title here. The title reads as follows. So pre-exposure prophylaxis in real life, experience from a prospective, observational, and demonstration project in Benin, West Africa. Next slide. What do you think is missing from this title? Can you answer to those 4 questions? What it is about, where did the study take place, who was the study population, and how did the authors conducted their study? We're going to launch a new poll here. Okay, we're going to give 10 more seconds. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's look at your answers. So 77% of the people who voted say the who is missing, the study population is missing. And indeed, if we look at this title, and to be fair, just a disclaimer, we will be using today example from a real JIAS article that we've been butchering a little bit. This is the correct title as it was published in the journal. And the title reads as follows: pre-exposure prophylaxis in real life. So now we know what it is about. Experience from a prospective, observational, and demonstration project. So we know how the study was conducted. It was a prospective, observational, and demonstration project among men who have sex with men. So this is an information that was missing in the title I showed you, in Benin, West Africa. So the study population was in the title. We removed it for the purpose of the exercise. But you can see already that if your research, for example, your interest and your topic of research is pregnant and breastfeeding women, well, you might not be interested in this paper. Accordingly, if you are actually focusing on men who have sex with men, but this is not in the title, you actually might miss this article that could be interesting for you and your research. Next slide. So what is an abstract? And we're going a level down. We have the title, very informative, as we said, and the title caught our attention and we want to read more. The next thing we are going to read is what is an abstract. Think that the abstract is often or all the time open access, while the rest of the manuscript is not necessarily open access. Depending on the journal the paper is published in, it could be behind a paywall. So again, you really want to make sure that your abstract includes all the important details and data from your research study, so it can serve as a standalone summary of your work. So your abstract usually is structured with the title that we just looked at, the introduction, which is the description of the issue, the knowledge gap, and the aim of your particular study. The method section that will describe the methodology used and the approach taken, the results, that would outline the findings and the data from your study, and then the conclusions, which will summarize your main outcomes, implication, and recommendation. Something very important here: do not go beyond what is established in your paper. Do not offer non-significant results and do not speculate. Just be very objective and report on the findings of your paper. Next slide, please. Another message that I want you to leave this workshop with is this idea that people don't read the whole article unless they have a vested interest in the topic. And many people rely on reading the abstract to decide whether they read the entire article. So remember, if it's something you're doing at the very end of your writing process, you might be a bit tired, and you have invested all your time in writing the main text. Take a good night's sleep and go back to your abstract, because that's a very important part. Even though you may be writing that at the very end, this is the first thing that your reader will read, and the first piece of research and science from your study they can engage with. Next slide. So this is an example of same abstract that, so it's the same paper, sorry, than we looked at when we're looking at the title. And I'm not going to read in detail this abstract session, but I want you to look at the different parts that are in various colors. So in the introduction, you can see that we have highlighted 3 different kinds of parts in this abstract. The first part is really highlighting what the topic is about. So in this particular paper, the topic is about HIV oral PrEP for men who have sex with men. Then the second part in green talk about the issue of that is taking place, and the issue is that the data are needed to assess its feasibility and relevance in real life. And then the last sentence you can see in the introduction section of this abstract is the aim of this particular study. So you go from sort of very general consideration to what you are actually willing to study within your paper. And if we look quickly at the method section, again, we can answer some key elements here, some key elements here. We know that the study took place in Benin. We know that they looked at a combination of tenofovir disoprosyl fumarate and antricitabine, and it was offered daily or on demand to MSM. We know the study period. The study took place between 24 August, to 24 November 2020 and followed over 12 months. And we know with the last sentence what were the outcomes that were studied. Next slide, please. The third part of an abstract is always a result section, and that's a super important part, obviously, of your abstract. And this is where you are going to summarize the main findings of your study. So I'm not going to read that in details, but you want this section to be precise. You don't want to be too vague, and you want to include in this section only the key results of your study that are allowing you to answer to your research question. Then the last part of your abstract is the conclusion. And in your conclusions, you are going to summarize again very briefly the take-home messages. Here it was that oral PrEP introduction in routine practice as a component of a holistic HIV prevention package was feasible. You may want to discuss a little bit the implication, and Alberto will discuss that a bit later. This is a part that could have been a bit strengthened in this paper, but this is a real life paper. So there's always room for improvement with all the papers. And then the authors here are giving some future recommendation based on their research. So they don't go crazy, but they go with something realistic that is based on their results. And it is that additional intervention, such as culturally tailored adherence counseling, may be needed to optimize the benefits of PrEP. So they're telling us a little bit what next, what else, what more should be done. Next slide. And now that we've been focusing on the title and the abstract. Alberto will guide you through the different parts, subsection of the meat of a paper, which is the main manuscript. Alberto, over to you.
Thank you, Marlène. Okay, so we're now going to look into the full article. So the full article has 4 main components: the introduction, the methods or materials, the results, which often include tables and figures, and the discussion, which must include limitations and conclusions. Okay, we're going to try to move this slide. Okay, so the introduction. So the introduction is there to contextualize what your research question is. And this table gives you a breakdown of what an introduction should look like. So there needs to be a background. So what is a topic that you're discussing? And then there's the context. So what do we already know about this topic and what previous research has shown? And then you want to express the challenge. So which is, why are you doing your study? And, are you doing it because there was a gap in research? So you want to highlight what is that knowledge gap in the research. And then you want to conclude it with, the question of the specific question of your study and the aim of your study. So why are you doing it? And what do you aim to fill with this research that you're conducting? The idea is, next. Okay, the idea is you start with general information, so you can contextualize, within a broader context. And then as you move on, you become more and more specific. So you want to guide your reader from a general information to a specific context of your study. Okay. And here again is the same article that Marlène has introduced before. And this is the introduction of the full article. So we'll give you a couple of minutes to read this, and then we're going to have a question for you. And then we're going to start to dissect each section to see what these are. So I'm going to go back 1 second to represent you the tables, the background, the context, the challenge, and the question or aim. This is what your introduction should be, should be presenting to the reader. And here is the introduction that we ask you to read, and then we'll respond to a question in a minute or 2. Yeah, 30 more seconds to read through this. And we can launch the poll. So for those that have already finished reading this, you can already start answering the question. So the question is, what do you think is missing from this introduction? The background, the context, the challenge, or the question, aim, objective? And don't be shy. The responses are anonymous, so feel free to share your opinion. And we're all here to learn. Okay, I can see that almost 50% responded. 10 more seconds. Okay, we can now end the poll and share the results. Before I give you the answer, we're actually gonna look at what the authors included in this part, and then we'll see what was actually missing. So next slide, if you can get, okay. So you can see that the authors start by giving a very broad, introduction and background information about HIV. So they start, sorry, this is moving way too fast. Okay, thank you. They give some historical perspective of the trends, and they describe some, situations with specific key populations. And that's the background, which is very broad. And then they move into the context, and the context here is about PrEP, and they describe a new recommendation that was introduced in 2015 by the WHO. And then they move on to the challenge, which is, okay, fine, we have this recommendation from the WHO, but in certain countries, specifically here in sub-Saharan Africa, access to PrEP remains minimal. And so that's a challenge. So that's a research gap that we want to fill. And so 74% of you indicated that the question or the aim was missing from this introduction part. So we can share the results so you all can see it. And then we're going to go into the next slide, which is where we can see the aim objectives that the authors. And again, this is something that we have purposely removed from the previous slide for the for this exercise. But you can see that the authors, after the challenge, they continue on and specifically describe what the objective or their study were. So they want to assess uptake, retention, and adherence to PrEP, and the trends in consistent condom use. And then they move on with sexual partners, HIV incidence, and trend in prevalence of some sexually transmitted disease. So you can see that they do provide this information very specifically. So this was a good introduction. Okay, we can stop sharing the results, and then we can move on to the next section, which is the methods. And so here you want to tell the reader how what you did and how you did it to address your scientific question. And so you want to convince them that what you did was appropriate to respond to that specific question. It's important that you provide enough information so that somebody else can replicate your study. Replication is an important component in the scientific process. So you want to make sure that everyone else theoretically can do it. And you want to be specific, provide, how data were collected, the statistics, and, everything else. We suggest that you organize your methods in subheadings, which will help the reader to follow a flow. Make sure you include the ethical approval of your study. And this should be written in the past tense because it's something that you have already done. Again, we're going to show a table. Do not include results. So there will be a fully dedicated section to the results later. So do not include results here. You can say what your inclusion and exclusion criteria were, for example. But you don't need to say, what the sample size of your study was in this section. So we're going to move on to the table. Next slide. Get there. Sorry for this technical challenges, moving slides. Okay, here you go. So the methods should respond to 5 key questions: who, when, where, what, and how. So let's look briefly at each one of those. So you want to tell the reader who was the subject of your study, or who was the targeted by the program of your study. You want to tell the readers when the study took place, or when the program was implemented, or when the data was collected. Because a study that was done in 2010, it's different than a study that was done in 2023, for example. So this is an important information to include. You want to tell the reader where the study took place. Because again, a study that was conducted in a city might be different than a study that was conducted in a rural area, or in one continent as opposed to another continent. And then you want to tell the reader what was measured in your study and what data was collected. And keep in mind that the what and the how are 2 different things. So you want to tell the reader what you measure, but you also want to tell the reader how you measure. What was the study? How was the study designed, and how were the outcomes of interest measured, collected, or analyzed? For example, we can say you measure adherence to PrEP, and that's what you did. But we can measure that by a survey, for example, or we can measure that by blood collection. So One thing is the what, the adherence, and the how would be how you actually get that data. Make sure that you provide sufficient details, but also bear in mind that each article have a word limit, so don't be too specific on the information that you provide. Otherwise, you're going to go over the word count. Okay, here's an example of a good use of some headings. You can see that in this article that the authors first describe what the data source was, then they move on to the study design, and then the study population, and then the study outcomes, and then statistical analysis. So a reader will be able to move smoothly through the different sections and understand the way that the study was conducted. Okay, we're now going to move on into the results. So this is where you present the key findings of your study. It's important that you all include the results that respond to your research question. We all know that while you do a study, you might collect other data, but if that additional data is not important to respond to your research question, do not include it, because it's basically meaningless in this context. Be specific, use dates, number, percentages, statistical, information, and everything else. Make sure about the terminology that you use. Significant is, associated with statistical analysis. So don't say this was significant unless you can prove it with a statistical value. Be specific, don't use some, many, few, a little bit, because those in science are not good terms. Use tables and figures whenever possible, and we'll discuss that in the next slides. And make sure when you use tables and figures, you follow a logical way. So start with for example, start with a sample description, and then describe the results that you got from that sample description, from that sample group. Do not discuss in your findings and do not speculate on them. Again, there will be a dedicated section about this, so that will be later. And again, do not repeat your methods. There was already a section dedicated to this, so do not waste space in your article. Do exactly what the results should be like. And it's important, we think, that you organize your results in a logical way. And here I'm showing you what the authors in the article that we're looking at did. So they started by summarizing the participant characteristics. So, the age, the gender, the country, and whatever else. And then they start, presenting one by one exactly the objectives that were introduced in the introduction. So I'm in the screenshot you see here, this is exactly what the introduction was. It's assess uptake, retention, and adherence to PrEP. And the authors, they present the results following this order: retention, adherence, and so on. So we think this will help the reader to follow a logical flow in the article and make the paper more appealing and easier to understand. Okay, so here's again a section taken from this paper. And we ask you to read it in the next minute, and then we're going to have a question related to this. Okay, 20 more seconds, and we can start launching the poll for those that have already finished. Okay, so the question here is whether the data could be more specific, or whether the data should be discussed, or nothing. This is perfect. Okay, 10 more seconds to respond to this. And we can now close the poll. and correctly so. More than 70% of you, 72% to be precise, indicated that the data could be more specific. So let's look at the data. Let's look at the results section from this paper. Again, we have intentionally changed it, edited it, but this is what the original paper looks like, and the parts in red is those that we have changed it for the purpose of this exercise. So you can see that, for example, we had tweaked it and indicated some did not attend the clinic, but the authors correctly saw they specified the exact number. 15 did not attend the clinic. And then we put the majority. No, that's not scientific writing. You should put the exact number. So again, hence 251, corresponding to 95%, were evaluated, and so on. So make sure you use specific numbers when you are presenting your results. This is very important for the readers to see. Okay, we can go to the next. And here's where we want to give you some tips about tables and figures. So we think they should be used when they are more helpful, in conveying the message than pure text. Make sure that they stand alone, meaning that I should be able to understand the table or the figure without necessarily reading the description in the results section. And choose the type of tables and figures that you think are best to convey the message that you want to convey, and make sure that you are careful with the use of colors. Nowadays most of the papers are online, but back in the days, when things were printed, it could be difficult for colorblind people, or if you have too many colors, the effect might be not as desired. So here's an example of a figure which we think it's good. So you can see that all the axes are labeled. There is a figure legend. And try to imagine how much space it would take into the authors to describe in words all these numbers, and that would mean that a lot of space. It would have been a lot difficult for the reader to understand the impact of the data. And then there's a table here, and what we want to highlight is the fact that it's a standalone table, meaning that there are the key information to understand the table are already included in the table. There's a little footnote there that will tell you how to interpret this table. So the reader doesn't have to go and find throughout the paper where the description of the table is. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next section, which is the discussion. So here's where you want to present how your findings address your original question. And so you basically want to restate your findings, but then you want to move on and contextualize those findings. So you want to make sure that you compare what you found with other studies, other previous studies, in different settings, in different timings, with different populations. And you want to tell the reader how generalizable these studies are. Your study is, beyond your context. So if you did a study, in a main city, would that apply to a different main city? If you did a study in a rural area, would that apply to a city? Or if you did it in Africa, would that apply to, Asia, for example? So you want to make sure that this is well discussed, and especially, we are particularly in the Journal of National AIDS Society, we're particularly keen on this because we are a journal of the International AIDS Society. So we want to make sure that our articles are presented in a very global context. Then you want to describe the implication of your findings, and what we think it's very important is that you present the limitations of your study. There's, it doesn't, the perfect study doesn't exist. All studies have a limitation, and it's important that you present it. And I will, I can't stress this enough because I can guarantee you that the editors and the reviewers will be able to see that your study has limitations. So you might as well, present them yourself and say how those limitations can impact your study and what you did to limit, or to, I should say, to reduce the impact of those limitations. Okay, on to the next. Do not overreach beyond the scope of your data. So if if you've done a study in a male population, for example, don't say that 100% your results will apply to a female population. Stick to what your data objectively can show and can support. And here is a discussion from the same paper. We don't need to read all of this, but we want you to see some highlighted parts. So the authors start in black here with retelling what the main findings are. In this case, that 80% of men choose daily prep as an option. Okay, but then you can see that they move on and they start immediately to contextualize these findings with other studies in another oral prep demonstration study, for example, or as compared to other men with sex with men, or they say in some West African countries, and so on, in line with previous findings, in different contexts. So it, really they put an effort in contextualizing their specific results into the more global, context. And then, again, very importantly, they are open about the limitations of their study. They start by saying this community-based study of a real-world oral prep experience among men with sex with men has limitation. Full stop. There is nothing wrong with that. Be honest, be open. And they do say that for this reason, the generalization of the findings could be limited. So that's important that you put it. There's nothing wrong. We value that the authors, are open about the limitations of their studies. And then the final part of the full manuscript will be the conclusions. So this is a short recap of everything you did. So you want to include take-home message. What are the implications of your findings? And to provide some future recommendations based on what you found. Avoid obvious statements, repetition, and overgeneralization. They should be a short paragraph, so don't waste your space on this. And this is the conclusion of this article. So the authors start by providing a take-home message, and then they move on with the implication. And Marlène already mentioned before that this part could have been strengthened a bit by the authors to provide a more general set of implications of their study, and then they provide some future recommendation based on what they were able to demonstrate in their study. So in summary, this is how the full article looks like. There's introduction. So start by giving some broad information and then move on more specifically, more focused into your research question. So use a funnel approach. Your methods. So make sure you include a who, where, what, how, and when. And then the results. It's important that you follow a logical approach. Start with the more generic results and then move on into the more specific data that you were able to collect with your study. And then the discussion and the conclusion. So recap briefly the results and then contextualize those results with the literature available. And then move on to the strengths and limitation and the conclusion of your study. Please use past tense when writing about introduction, methods, and results, and use the present tense when discussing your results and providing the conclusion notes. So to wrap everything up, a good scientific article has to do more than just present a lot of data. It must tell a clear, compelling story. So you really want to make sure that once the reader starts reading your article, they feel attracted, they feel interested. You should spark some interest in the reader, so they will read the full article and will you want to make sure that the data is easily digestible. And with this, I believe I'm going back to Marlène, right?
Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you, Alberto. So now you know everything about writing a good manuscript and what you should include where. During the few minutes that remains, I would like to focus a little bit on understanding the editorial process of an article publication. So that may be a bit sort of this black box of what's happening when you have submitted your paper. Next slide, please. So we mentioned it at the very beginning, how to choose a journal and submit a manuscript. Next slide. So finding the right journal for your research is sort of a three-part exercise. The first part is really thinking of who your primary audience is. So who do you need to reach, basically? Which readers would find your research most useful? What fields or disciplines match your topic? The second part is really identifying potential journals. So again, think about whether your audience should be more general, like with general interest, or do you want to go in a specialized journal? Do you think that your readers will be, it will be more interesting for readers who are more local or national or international? So then it goes with the kind of journal you're going to submit to. Do you want to go to an international journal, a regional or local journal? Do you want to go with an open access journal, meaning that all the readers can read the paper, but there's a publication fee for the authors? Or do you want to go with a subscription-based journal where the readers have to pay to access the paper, but the authors do not have, or a small fee? And that you may also want to look at your grant, and if your grant has specific requirement in terms of the type of journal you need to submit to, open access versus subscription-based journals. And the final part is also thinking about the reputation of your journal, and I understand that it can be a bit tricky. Maybe when you're used to publish and read a lot of papers, you can sort of easily see or easily identify a good journal from a journal that might be a bit more dubious in terms of reputation. But there are ways to look at the reputation of a journal. The first one is looking at who the editors and editorial board members are. Do you know them? Have you ever read anything from them, or you have no idea who they are? How serious is the peer review process? Is the journal indexed in PubMed, for example? What is the journal impact factor? Are the publication fees clearly indicated, if they have any publication fees, or is it something which is a bit hidden? How many articles have been published by the journal? Is it a brand new journal with 10 published articles? And so it's a bit tricky to judge the quality of a journal, or is it a very well-established journal that exists, or that has been existed for the past, I don't know, 10 years, 20 years? Talk about the journal with your colleagues. Do they know the journal you are thinking of? Have they been already publishing in this journal? So based on that, when you have identified potential journals, you can select 2 or 3 journals to consider, and you can order them, saying, I'm going to submit first to this journal, then this one, then this one. Then comes the manuscript submission, and something that we've been repeating again and again is look at the instruction for authors. So go on the journal web page, look at the guidelines, look at a recent issue of a journal. Super useful when you start writing. It gives you an idea of the kind of papers this journal is publishing. And there are some resources out there to help you, like the ICMGE when it comes to authorship, or Equator Network that has a lot of guidelines for a lot of study types. The most often ignored introduction are the word count limits. You will go to the website of the journal you want to submit to, and they're going to tell you that, for example, in the case of JIAS, if you want to publish a research manuscript, the word count is 3,500. If it's qualitative science, is going to be 5,000. And each journal will have some specificity. So go look at the word counts and the guidelines. Look at the formatting. Sometimes you receive papers that are clearly not formatted for our journal. It's not necessarily wrong per se, but it tells us that we were not the first choice of a journal. So the journal might not be your first choice, but the editors do not need to know that. So please make sure you reformat your paper for the specific journal you have in mind. Look at your table and figures. Sometimes the journal will tell you to insert those in the text, and others will ask to put them at the end of the manuscript. Make sure that you're providing good quality figures or photos if you're including photos. And again, look at abbreviation and make sure you are spelling them out the first time you're using them in the manuscript. So this is an example of what's happening when a paper is being submitted. And today we're using an example of BMG, so not JIAS, but it is also to tell you that this is a very common process for all peer-reviewed journals. It's pretty standardized. First, you are going to submit your journal, and then the editorial team will appraise the manuscript, sorry. So they're going to look at the quality, the soundness, the originality of the paper, whether it fits within the scope of a journal. And then they can, at that stage, either decide that it is not a good fit for the journal, so they're going to reject it right away, or they're going to decide to send it to peer review. The paper is then, in that case, being sent to reviewers, so experts in the field, and they will appraise the paper, return the reviews to the editors, and we are here in the step 4. And based on that, the editors will make a decision. So based on the recommendation of the reviewers, they will decide that, yes, we think that the paper can be revised according to the reviewers' comments. It is feasible, or no, we don't think it is, and actually the reviewers are saying that it is not a good fit, or there are flaws, or there are reasons not to accept the paper. So based on those comments, the editors will return the review to the reviewers, and they can either reject after peer review right away, or invite the authors to revise their manuscript and resubmit. And then we expect the authors to very, very thoroughly address all the reviewers and all the editorial comments there. Once this is done, the authors will resubmit their manuscript to the editorial team. And again, another step of appraisal where the editors will look at whether the paper has been correctly, appropriately revised, and they send the paper back and the response to reviewers, to the original reviewers, to ask them for their opinion, or maybe even make the decision themselves. And again, a decision to either reject we may invite the authors to resubmit or to transfer to another journal, or then the authors are also free to decide what they want to do once the paper is being rejected. And if a paper is accepted, the next steps are the proofreading phase, when you get the proof from the publisher. And then ta-da, you throwing a big party because your paper has been published. Next slide, please. Oh, okay, there is some faces. So what are the most common reasons for rejection? And first, before I dig there, we know it's really hard to have a paper rejected. We have all been there. I've been there, Alberto's been there, and I don't know any scientist who never had one of their paper rejected at some point. So don't take that personally. First of all, just breathe a little bit and see why the paper was being rejected. And when it comes to a rejection upon submission, the editors have sort of a checklist that we go through. So we look at whether the paper fit within the scope of a journal, whether the objectives of a study are clear, whether the results are important, whether the study will contribute something novel, if study design and the methodology is valid, if a presentation is of good quality, and if a manuscript globally follow the journal guidelines. Each journal will have sort of different criteria. Those are the most common, but we all look at a paper that makes sense and fit within the scope and the mission of a journal. If it's not, if it doesn't fit, we prefer rejecting right away. It does not make sense if we know that the paper will not be a good fit for a journal. It does not make sense to send it to peer reviewers. It penalizes the authors, the reviewers who are giving their time for free, and the editors. So it's better to then resubmit in another journal that is a better fit. Next slide. So if a paper has not been rejected and it has been sent to reviewers and you're receiving the peer review comments, so what should you be doing there? First thing is take a breath and take a moment. As we're saying, it's never really nice to get people sort of criticizing your paper or just doubting or asking you to do more. But it is for the best, and it is really to improve your paper. So breathe, have a walk, take a glass of water or whatever you want, and then get into it and respond to every question and comment. And do that in a very systematic and organized way. So list or number each of the comment and respond for example, in a different font or a different format. No rule, we just want that to be very understandable for the editors. We can see the question of the reviewers and how you responded to that. Include references to where in the text you have made some change. Just don't say, yes, I did it. Okay, great, but where? Use the comments constructively. So if the reviewers did not understand something, chances are that your readers won't understand either. You can disagree, that's completely fine, as long as you provide a clear reason why. So consider expressing your point differently if a reviewer did not understand your points. Argue with data and published literature where you can, so it's substantiated. And consider bringing up the disagreement within the discussion if it has something that you had not been thinking of initially. Keep your reply short and to the point. Thank the reviewers for their constructive comment, even if there are a lot. They're doing that on their free time, they're not being paid for it. And please be polite and respectful. Even if you feel boiling a little bit, there's no need to be sarcastic or rude. Never gonna end well for you. Next slide, please. So this is an example of how you could respond. Again, this is, you can see here that in black, we have the reviewer's comment, and in blue, we have the author response. And here, you can see that the authors explain what they've been doing, and they clarify that the changes have been made between lines 2017 and 2019. So easy to actually assess what has been done and to control what has been done. Next slide, please. Just let's take a minute to discuss publication quality and ethics. There are sort of 7 themes here of what you should never be doing when you write your paper or when you conduct research more globally. The first thing is carelessness. So make sure you do not pick and choose the citation and the references that you are going to include, for example, in your discussion, your introduction. Do not understate, do not be negligent, do not do faulty analysis. Be honest with your results. And if you feel that your results are not ready and your paper is not ready, then just wait a bit more, do a bit more, but don't be careless when you write your paper. Do not plagiarize others. So that means, for example, putting sources and not disclosing them, copying some text that is not your own without properly citing the authors and adding references. Be careful of redundancy, and redundancy is what we call the salami publications, meaning that you have a set of data of results and you want to do as many little papers as possible. Don't do that. Like, tell a story, and that's fine. You better have like 1 very strong paper than 4 very weak papers. Unfair authorship that include ghosts and guest authors is the failure to include eligible authors, or on the contrary, to add authors who should absolutely not be there because they have not done anything on the paper. Make sure that you're declaring any competing interests, whether they are personal, professional, or financial. Doesn't mean that your paper is not a good paper. Just be honest if there are some element that could be perceived as a conflict of interest, because, I don't know, you gave a lecture and you got an honorarium from a pharma company. That doesn't mean necessarily that your work is not that it is biasing your work, but you just need to be transparent here. Obviously, one of the main themes in our list is subject violations, meaning that you've been conducting some research, either with human or animal, depending on what your field is, but you never got ethical review board approval for the study. And the 7th one is fraud, meaning data fabrication and falsification, when suddenly you got overnight results appearing in your paper. So you are the guardian of the science you're presenting. So be proud of your results and make sure that you're respecting ethics here. There's a new sort of latest addition to this list that Alberto will guide you through, which is, I'm sure you've all seen the appearance of AI when writing scientific manuscripts. Alberto, over to you.
Thank you, Marlène. We'll finish the webinar in a couple of minutes. I'm sorry we were a bit late. I would recommend you that you check this paper, and again we will share the recording so you can see the reference. We have abstracted for you a few sentences that we think you should pay attention to, because these tools are becoming popular and easy to use. But as a scientific journal, we really want to warn you or to make you aware of the risks associated with using these tools. Let me see if I can move the slide to the next. Okay, so here are some quotes from this article, and basically, I'll make it short because we are short of time. But be aware that artificial intelligence tools do not use the most recent databases. So if an article was published, a few months, groundbreaking article was published a few months ago, the ChatGPT will not know about that, and so you risk missing out important information, or even worse, wrong information if a recently published article has demonstrated that some previous findings were wrong. Another important component that we want you to be aware of is that there's a high risk of unconscious plagiarism, because you might use something that the artificial intelligence tool produced, but that might be a copy paste from somewhere else, and if you're not aware, the risk of plagiarism high, and that might lead to rejection of the paper. So again, we encourage you to read that paper. If you do not want to read the whole paper, go through this key extracts, and do remember that, let's see if we can move it again to the next. Okay, remember that all journals have tools to check whether that text has been produced by artificial intelligence, so we can see that, so make use of it in a very intelligent and careful way. That's our recommendation. And with this, we're moving on to the final slide, which is some useful resources for you to consult. If you have any questions about ethical approvals and guidelines and so on, these are resources that we suggest you to consider. And with that, I'm afraid that we're going to have no time for the questions. We have responded to as many questions as possible during the session in the Q&A functionality. We want to thank you all for your participation. We want to thank our the support from the Educational Fund in the International AIDS Society, which received support from VIV and Gilead. So we're very grateful of their support for this capacity building activities. Again, thank you all for this. We will share the recordings, and we will have other workshops in the future. So please do sign up for our email list, and we hope to see you again in this workshops.
And if some of you are attending IAS 2023 in 3 weeks, make sure you come say hi and see us. We will be there, and we'll do a live workshop there. So in the meantime, good luck to all of you for your papers, and we look forward to receiving those to the Journal of International AIDS Society. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you're joining us, and we hope to see you soon. Bye.